Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Ledermann, and I'm with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources Fish and Wildlife Outreach section. Today, we are so excited to be talking about birding. This is episode number 172 of the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series. And joining us today is May Vang. May is actually a brand new member of our outreach team within Fish and Wildlife. We're so excited to have you joining our team, May. But most recently, before she came over to Fish and Wildlife, she was working on a bird by bird program and teaching people about birding. And I'll let her tell you more about that program and what she's going to have in store for us today. So welcome, May. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello, everyone. My name is May Vang, and like Jeff said, I work for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. So I just joined the Fish and Wildlife Division. Prior to this position, I did work at the non-game wildlife program as the bird by bird program coordinator, which is a program that I'm going to be sharing a little bit about today. And I'm really excited to be here, and I'm hoping that today you will be able to take away some tips and some activities that you can get started with bird watching. So prior to the non-game, I actually spent a lot of times in my career as an environmental educator. So for a little bit over 12 years, I worked as an environmental educator at lots of different organizations, including like nature centers and environmental learning centers, St. Paul Public Schools, as well as the Minnesota Zoo, but I worked with a variety of age group. There was a really big focus on youth and elementary students, but I also have done a lot of programming with teens, young adults, and adults in general as well. So today, again, I'm going to be sharing some tips on one way to connect to nature through bird watching. And I will be sharing ways to introduce them specifically a lot to young people, but really just to anyone in general. So if you are a person that is interested and you're new to bird watching, I hope this today will also help as well. Perhaps that's you or another person in your life. And Jeff, please let me know if you don't see my slides.
Looks good so far. Thank you.
So you might be wondering why connect to nature, right? So there are lots and lots of research that says that a little time in nature, even if it's just 5 minutes or a couple minutes out of your day, that is really beneficial to you both mentally and physically. Just a little bit of time really helps with reducing stress. It really encourages your creativity outside. It helps improve your mood. I don't know about everyone else, but if it's been a stressful day, even the 2 minutes stepping outside in my backyard is really helpful with improving my mood. It also provides space and recreational activity for you to engage in physical health activities or physical activities. And that also helps with your your physical health as well. And birds are a perfect way to be connecting to nature. And you might be wondering why birds? And I get this question all the time, again, from the youth and the students that I've worked with in the past. So I would take them on hikes for half an hour, and after half an hour, we would see 10 to 15 different bird species. And then we would come back and they would say, where are all the animals? Right? So we didn't see any animals outside. And I always think to myself, what about the 10 to 15 bird species that we just saw? Those are animals. But I guess the biggest piece is they are getting that outdoor connection. But all that to say is that birds are all around us. They are everywhere. They are very easily accessible, and there are just so many different species. And so if you are just outside paying attention to all of the different things that you're seeing, whether those are big or small, all of that also has connections to birds as well. And sometimes they're just so easily accessible. They're everywhere. Again, like these students that maybe they're so common that we oftentimes just forget that they are there or forget to notice them. So again, birds are a really great entry point and connection to all sorts of conservation themes and topics. And you don't have to introduce all of them, but it's one way to really get into becoming a steward of the natural world. You can pretty much tie birds into anything and everything. So birds, for example, are a really, really big indicator species of how healthy an ecosystem is. So let's take, for example, the great blue heron. It eats fish, right? So outside of a bot or out of a body of water, whether that's a lake, a stream, a pond, and they also are living in the pond or the lake or the stream its whole life, right? So it's really dependent on the water quality of that body of water. Humans, we also depend on this body of water. We might depend on it a little bit differently, but we might use it for maybe recreating on it. We use water for drinking water and everyday things in our lives, right? Like cooking. We also might eat the fish that come out of the water as well. So for example, like a bluegill, right? And so if you start to take a really close look at it, all of that stuff ties in with birds. And if you take a deeper dive into it, there are so many different connections that you can make once you start looking and taking a deeper dive into the different connections that you see on here. I do warn you though that bird watching is highly addicting. And so once you get started, you will never unsee those new birds that you learn. And so if you are ready for that, just so you know that there's really no turning back once you get into bird watching. So I want you to really take maybe just these next 30 seconds to think about the first time you notice a bird. Maybe if it's not a bird, think about something you notice in nature or think about an animal that you noticed for the first time. And I want you to think about what exactly it is that what exactly it was that you noticed about this animal or this bird or whatever that is in nature. Was it, if you're thinking of a bird, was it like the color of its fur or feathers? Was it like a tiny little streak of white around its eyes? Maybe a specific behavior that it was displaying? Did it make a sound that you had never heard before? So I was one of those young people. So I was just like one of those young students that did notice the birds, but I just thought it's just a bird, just like the little brown birds. And so if you are already in the birding world, you know that the little brown birds are all the different species of sparrows. And to a lot of people, they're just a little brown bird, right? But once you start looking, you'll start to notice all of the differences. And so I always just wonder, oh, it's just a bird. But what really sparked my interest in bird watching was I worked as a seasonal naturalist at Afton State Park. And I remember working there and I remember seeing a lot of these bird watchers coming to the park. They always showed up at the same time, stayed for the same duration of time, always stayed in the same exact spot. And I went out and I was just wondering, like, what exactly are they looking at? So one day I did ask a gentleman just to ask him what was he looking at. And he had one of those huge fancy cameras. And he told me that he was looking for an indigo bunting. At that time, I had never seen an indigo bunting before. I had never heard of an indigo bunting, but it had to be good, right, for them to come out that many times. And he also expressed that he's been trying to get a photo of this bird for several years. And so I really wanted to figure out what it was. So I did go back and Google it. And for those of you that don't know what it looks like, here's what it looks like. So it has this radiant blue, right? And I was really, really hoping to find this bird that time during that time that I worked at Afton State Park. And in fact, I never did actually see it. But it wasn't until 1 or 2 years later that I actually saw this bird for the first time, actually at a park called Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary. And this was a park that I had been working for about 3 or 4 summers with a youth group already. And it wasn't the radiant blue that really struck me. It was actually the size of the or not the caterpillar, but the grasshopper that it had in its mouth. And that was actually what really sparked my interest in birding. And so I want you to think about this And I bet you can think back. So when I asked you to think about the first time you noticed a bird or an animal that sparked your interest, I want you to think back to that moment because I bet you can pinpoint exactly the details of what sparked your interest. And I want you to keep this in mind because this is exactly how you are going to inspire or spark your young learner or someone else in your life about spark them in bird watching or any connection to nature as well. So today I'm going to share some tips on how to get the young person in your life started in bird watching as well as yourself. And again, I may refer to some activities from the Bird by Bird program, which I will be talking about next. But the goal is to introduce your young person or yourself to bird watching right where you are. And I really hope that you will walk away from today's webinar with tips and ideas on how to engage yourself or others in bird watching. So the Minnesota DNR's non-game wildlife program does have this program called Bird by Bird. And again, I was the Bird by Bird program coordinator before joining the Fish and Wildlife Division. And this program engages and introduces elementary students and communities to bird watching in several different ways and capacities. So one way is through community or place-based environmental education. So it's really actually bringing environmental education that's bird focused into elementary schools, specifically to elementary schools that are maybe don't quite have the funding or the staff or the tools to engage their students in environmental learning or environmental education. Another piece of the program is outdoor leadership training. So it's working with high school students, specifically from underrepresented communities, and getting them engaged with different conservation organizations, introducing them to natural resource careers with a bird focus. And then also community engagement. And so really engaging different communities, new communities, either surrounding those elementary schools or just new communities in general that maybe don't have access to these type of opportunities or just new communities that are interested in bird watching. And again, I will be referring to this program and you will see some photos throughout the presentation that highlights the program. If you have any questions regarding the program, you could, or wanting to learn about ways you can get involved, you can contact Jessica Ruthenberg, who is the non-game wildlife engagement supervisor. And I believe Cassie will leave her contact information as well as the link to more information about what the program is. So my tip number one is to really start outside right in your backyard. And in fact, you probably don't even have to step in your backyard. You can just look outside your window, open your window. If you don't have any equipment, so for example, feeders or bird bath, just listen. I encourage you to just listen. So sounds are a really, really great way to get people excited about bird watching. You may be hearing one bird or two birds or several, and you might hear the same sound all the time. Although the hard piece is that one bird does have many different bird calls, but that's also the fun of it, right? The fun piece of it is that you can get to learn, get to know all of those different bird sounds. But you might hear one bird sound and maybe you never see the bird. Maybe it's hiding in a shrub in your yard. Maybe it's really high up at the tree, covered in foliage. Maybe it only comes out at night. So there is a wonderful app. And what's really wonderful, it is that it is completely free. A lot of us have access to devices where we can download this app. It's called the Merlin Bird ID through Cornell. And it's really neat because it's a fun way to discover those hard to see birds. So when I explain it to people who have no idea what this app is or who's new to bird watching, I describe it as the bird Shazam. So if you don't know what Shazam is, it's an app where it helps identify sound or songs for you. So you can be walking through the grocery store, maybe pumping gas, or maybe watching a TV show, and a really neat song comes on, and you're like, I really want to know who sings this, but I have no idea. It's just a push of a button, and it pops out the title and the artist of the song. So this is exactly essentially what the Merlin Bird app does. And so you go on your walk. with the push of a button, you push start bird ID, and then it records all of the birds that are singing at the moment. And it will also pop up underneath a list of the birds that it recognizes. And you can even click on each of those birds and you can find out more information, more detailed information about that bird. So it's a really, really neat app. And it's really fun. And in fact, it keeps the list for you so you can also go back the recording so you can replay the recording again if you want to learn how to identify birds by ear. So one example of how I use this app is there's a bird called a common nighthawk. I hear this bird several times throughout in my neighborhood, and I had no idea what it was. In fact, I didn't even know it was a bird because it sounds almost like a frog instead. And I wasn't able to see what the bird was because it comes out a little bit later in the evening, so dawn and dusk. So I actually used the bird app, the Merlin app, and I found out that it was called a common nighthawk. And for those that don't know what a common nighthawk is, this is what it looks like. And it completely made sense because if you don't know anything about a common nighthawk, they actually like to nest on, well, one of the places that they prefer to nest on is a flat gravel rooftop. And in fact, I have an apartment building that has a flat gravel rooftop right by my house. It also hunts at dawn and dusk for flying insects, which explains why I only heard it at night. I also encourage you to go for bird walks around your neighborhood and explore. And again, you don't have to just explore just the birds, right? There's lots of different wildlife that's there as well. Wildlife can be on a small scale. It could be the ants in the crack in the sidewalk. Birds could be eating some of those insects, right? So there's lots of different things that are related. So again, just go out. Be consistent about observing, making observations, and it doesn't have to be long. It can be 1 to 5 minutes. And the more consistent you are with making observations, the more you will start practice that, get in the habit, and start to notice more. So this is just an American robin, right? But I'm going to play this really short clip. And I want you to just take a look and see what you can observe. So what did you notice? So again, this was right in my backyard. And it was just an American robin for me, right when I first started birding, or right before I started birding, right? But if you looked really closely, did you notice how it tilts its head from side to side, looking for food? Or even just the feathers on its head, how it kind of puffs up as its body cavity inflates as it breathes in and out. And I never noticed that until I spent some time observing that robin in my backyard. And I think I probably sat out there for like an hour looking at this robin, and also because I wanted to film it. But or you can bring the birds to you. So in your backyard, there are already birds, but if you would like to see more, you can always bring them to you using different feeders. And so here's an example of some feeders that we set up for that bird by bird program. Again, bringing the birds to the schoolyards by installing these bird feeders is just giving the students more of an opportunity to see more birds up close, but more different species as well. And so if you are interested in learning more about backyard bird feeders and how to attract them to your backyard feeders, we do have in our archive, so I believe it's episode 105. We can double check that, or Cassie can put it in the chat, but Lori Nauman from the Non-Game Wildlife Program does share information about how to attract birds to your backyard bird feeders. So I would suggest that if that's something you are interested in, you go back to our archive and watch that episode. I also want you to be creative about how you set up your bird feeders and how you involve your your young learners, your young people in your life, right? So you might maybe not have the space for it. Again, there is an apartment building that has a gravel rooftop, right? Here's an example of a school that had a gravel rooftop, and we had some wonderful volunteers in her family actually came up with this design so that the students could have a feeder right outside their window. So I encourage you to have your young person also be creative maybe they build something like a bird feeder out of recycled materials and let them really design it the way that they want to. This will encourage them to learn about how a bird actually feeds on seeds or insects. It also teaches them about adaptations, right? Gives them an opportunity to do a little research on how birds can access their food. So kind of like a little STEM design challenge. I also want you to think about take it as like a trial and error. So try different bird seeds to see what you can attract to your bird feeders, and allow, if you're working with a young person, allow them to be involved in every step of the way, including deciding where to put the feeders. And so maybe in the process, they will install it in one place and discover that birds don't really like that area and they might move it. So again, trial and error. Also allow them to help with sanitizing or maintaining or filling the feeders as well. So allowing them to be in part of the whole process does give them a sense of ownership. And again, that sense of ownership will also inspire them to learn more about the birds, get to know them, participate in conservation efforts as well. And it's just exciting if you are successful. So your young learners, or even like I myself, when I put bird feeders up in my yard, it's also exciting when you know that you can also attract some different bird species to your yard. So another idea for just a quick feeder and a fun story is that obviously this school that didn't have a green space, they had a rooftop. We put the feeders out. No birds were attracted to that. No birds actually showed up at that one. But we did put up these 2 window feeders, and it was success. And success for that school, that particular classroom, just meant that there was one single bird that showed up at those window feeders throughout the whole entire year that they participated. But the teacher was so excited that the teacher actually called while she was with the students and was really excited about sharing that one bird actually did come to their bird feeder. So that was pretty fun and exciting to see. My tip number 2 is to start simple so you don't have to learn the names of birds right away. So start really simple with observing features. So for example, take a look at these and I bet you recognize at least one of the silhouettes, right? So maybe you notice the duck in the upper right, left-hand corner. Maybe you notice the pigeon down in the lower left-hand corner, or the owl in the right lower hand corner, or the cardinal in the upper left hand or the upper right hand, right? And so again, it's silhouettes. And then, just think about, or maybe you don't recognize even the duck, but you recognize that the duck has webbed feet. And that, indicates that this is a swimming bird, right? Once you do that, you can introduce those different, what they call field marks. So field marks could be, for example, like the overall size and shape of the bird, maybe the structure or the bill shape, maybe the color or patterns, again, the leg and feet structures. And again, I didn't put the slide on here, but the Merlin Bird app also does that as well. So let's say you saw a bird out there and you had no idea what it is. But maybe you have some background knowledge about like the size of a crow or the size of a robin. There are different sizes that you can pick. So you can simply pick bigger than a crow or similar to a crow. And then it asks you a lot of like yes or no questions or gives you option, and then it narrows it down to different species of birds, specific different species. And that's one way it helps you identify. It's really simple to use, so I encourage checking that out. Or the next thing, once you start getting familiar with the different silhouettes, you can start taking a look at different behaviors, right? So again, the other photos on the right-hand side, there's no specific photo of a bird. It's also a silhouette, but you can tell that they're doing different, are displaying different behaviors. So you can also just start looking at like, what do they recognize? What are the birds doing in these different silhouettes? Then you can also use photos. So just observing, if you can't see a bird, maybe there's a bird like the great blue heron, maybe you're not by a lot of water, but you take a look at it and you want to learn more about water birds until you have access or an opportunity to get near water. Maybe you start looking at photos, and again, it's not important to identify the birds with young learners, but maybe just starting to recognize different features, right? Or different characteristics or different behaviors. So you might look at like the upper right-hand corner with the male house finch, and they might not even notice the house finch. Maybe they might notice how small the bird seeds are. Or the lower left-hand corner, maybe they don't notice the pigeons, but maybe they notice the building in the back. That's okay. Let them notice that. That's an observation that they're taking in. And here is tip number 3. So it includes some sort of hands-on component. Sometimes this might take like a little prep work, but the prep work doesn't have to be a lot of work as well. This is an example of a hands-on component that was used in the Bird by Bird program. So it was a bird bingo sheet that we used. And again, the goal is not for the youth to identify the young people to identify specific bird species yet, but just to get excited about using their binoculars and practice their observation skills. So there are things that we included, like for example, like look for a street sign or a stop sign, or maybe a student was like excited about looking at being able to read someone's car license plate, or the street name from afar. Or maybe it's hanging on or holding or touching a feather for the first time. So really including that hands-on component. Use games and activities to introduce conservation themes or adaptations. So you can see in the left-hand side, there's students playing a migration game where they are pretending to be a songbird, trying not to get eaten or caught by a raptor. Or on the right-hand side, students are learning about bird adaptations. And so pretending to use tools that represent different bird beaks to see how that helps a bird eat different kinds of food. Tip number 4, so access to tools. Tools can be very, very impactful, but we recognize that tools can also be a barrier for those that are wanting to try bird watching for the first time. So if you don't know already, there are many, many state parks out there, as well as nature centers and libraries that actually provide these nature kits that include binoculars, free of use for you to borrow. So you can just go ahead and like check it out, and you can use it and then just return it when you're done. But this is a really great way to try out some of these tools or get access to some of these tools. Um, if you don't have access to binoculars, especially for really, really young learners, there's a really fun way you can find probably instructions on this all over, but you can also make your own toilet paper ones, right? So this, again, probably does not have the magnification that a real binocular does, but what this really teaches young learners is that it helps give them that tunnel vision, and it does really help them focus and make those observations. And it's just fun, right? Who doesn't love arts and craft? Other helpful tools, if you don't have access to these, again, there are those kits that will provide some of those, or you can go to the public library as well. And these are free of use, but these are some that I really like. So there's a Sibley's Backyard Birds of the Upper Midwest. This one I really like because it is foldable, it's laminated, so it's weather resistant. You can take it outside. It's lightweight. You can take it anywhere you want to go. And then the Peterson First Guide, even for like an adult as like someone that's birding for the first time, this is also a really great way to figure out how to use a field guide or like a book without it being too intimidating. So if you pick up like a really, really advanced field guide, that could be a little overwhelming, but even starting with a really simple one to help you get used to how the field guide is actually separated and how it's organized, that's a really helpful way to get started when you're just starting bird watching. And again, our state parks has lots of great resources. Not only do we have programs, but we also have these bird checklists. So if you are looking to find different birds at these state parks, make sure that you pick one of these up. And again, if you have no idea what some of these birds are, you can use some of these bird field guides to figure out what they are before you actually go out to do some birding. My tip number 5 is consider how to make the experience relevant, right? So you probably aren't going to participate in something that you're not interested in, or if you don't find it relevant to your life, right? And so one example of how this can be done is when you talk about migration. So when we worked with students in schools, there were a lot of students that were had just come over from Ecuador, and the teacher suggested that we talk about the migration route of ruby-throated hummingbirds, and mentioned that they will migrate, not also, but they migrate from the US and they go all the way down to Ecuador or Central America. And just even mentioning that, like those students get really, really excited. That's something that they can connect with. Or they really let your young learner or anyone that you're trying to bird watch with guide you, right? So you might be guided to tree frogs, and that's okay because tree frogs, there's a connection to birds as well, right? So I'm not going to tell you what the connection is because I do want you to think about what is the connection with tree frogs and birds, right? But there are connections to lots of things, anything and everything. Also have a little fun, right? So if you don't know, or if you do know, on the left-hand side is a red-winged blackbird photo, and it literally is named the red-winged blackbird because it has a patch of red on its wing, and it's a blackbird. So if you just imagine in your head, what is a red-winged blackbird? You know, you might have some sort of variation of this kind of bird. Again, on the right-hand side is a yellow-headed blackbird, right? And so I'm thinking in my head, okay, when I first saw this bird, I was like, oh, well, I know what a red-winged blackbird is. I bet this is before I actually saw the bird. I was like, I bet it has a yellow head. And so it's just fun to have your student, again, if they don't want to right away figure out the name of the bird, have them name their own bird. That helps them connect to it. It's relevant to them. And then later on, you can teach or they'll remember the actual name of the bird that they're interested or just learned. So what would you name the bird on the right? So we know the left-hand side is a red-winged blackbird, but what would you call the one on the right? And in fact, they are both red-winged blackbirds, right? But one is a male and one is a female. So again, it goes to show that if you do just want your young learners to learn, you can actually just go ahead and have them name the bird however they see it. Maybe they name it a striped brown bird, okay? Tip number 6 is to provide a unique experience. And again, this might not be accessible to everyone, but if you have an opportunity to do this, this makes a really, really big difference in inspiring someone in your life who wants to get started in bird watching. And so sometimes it might be an opportunity to visit like a beautiful place. For example, this is at Carpenter Nature Center. The staff there are amazing. They have lots of amazing programs there that they can engage you in bird watching if you are new to it. Um, Again, it's also exploring in your backyard, but if you have the opportunity to get outside of your backyard, even if it's just the next green space that's right next to your homes, that's also another great way to provide yourself with a unique experience. Bird banding is also a really unique experience. So this was at one of the Three Rivers Park District volunteers. So you can see an ovenbird. It's a unique experience to be able to bird band and get up really up close, learn about why researchers do band birds, and really get up close to taking a look and observing a bird that you maybe only see from a distance up close. Tip number 7 is share your enthusiasm. So your enthusiasm with a new birder goes a really, really long ways, and it's really, really contagious. And if you are trying to inspire someone, you can volunteer. So you can volunteer by volunteering for the Bird by Bird program, or there are lots of different other programs, nature centers that work with lots of different people on how to get involved with bird watching. Just wanted to share these. So these are, you can volunteer to help with the classroom. You can volunteer to engage with the community. These are all wonderful volunteers from the Bird by Bird program. Again, you can do some bird banding. Or one big thing is just showing students how to use a pair of binoculars. That's really helpful is using a pair of binoculars is probably not the easiest thing when you first get started. And then tip number 8 is explore different habitats. So again, that could just be your backyard to the green space right next to you. Or if you're able to, and there's an opportunity, there's lots of different opportunities to explore the fascinating world of birds. So you might explore just kayaking, right? Or taking a paddle down the river to look for water birds. Or in this case, this was a fall migration paddle with one of the park rangers. And rivers are a huge, or any body of water, right? But rivers are a huge, huge migratory flyway for many birds. And so pick different seasons, different times of the year, but also pick different bodies of waters and different habitats to explore. Or you might want to try a night hike with a park ranger as well and discover what it is like to be a nocturnal bird, like an owl. I also encourage you to do sit spots. So again, your sit spot is just anywhere where you could sit to make like a 5-minute observation. So that could be on the steps of your front door. That could be at a park close by. That could be in your backyard. Your sit spot could even be from your window as well. Here's an example of one of my sit spot, which I had to sit for a little bit longer than 5 minutes, but it was well worth it. Here's another one of my sit spot highlights. So a wood duck with all of her chicks. And if you don't see anything during your sit spots, it does take a little prep time, but photos of birds on a stick placed in areas where you're going to be exploring is a great way to get people excited. So if you know you are going out to a certain area to explore for birds, this is always a great backup option. And so all it is just a laminated photo of a bird on a stick, and you can place them out along the route that you plan on taking. Again, this gets people excited about bird watching. But if you see lots of live birds, that is even more amazing. So you don't have to use these. But my only suggestion is that if you have like a picture of like a woodpecker or something, making sure that you place a woodpecker photo on like a tree instead of a shrub. Tip number 9 is to take action and get involved. And so there are lots of different ways you can do this. Once you start getting to learn all of the different birds and learn about their adaptations, learn about maybe like the threats they face or conservation needs, there are different ways that you can get involved to help with these conservation efforts. So you can take action and get involved by, for example, monitoring bluebirds, bluebird nests. So you can help out by monitoring them, prepping them to get them prepared and ready for the nesting season, cleaning them out. Oops, I'm going to go back. You can also participate in citizen science as well. And so this is the Project Feeder Watch. So if you do install feeders at your homes, and again, you don't even need to have a feeder for this. You can just observe them in your backyard or wherever you decide to in your neighborhood. But this usually occurs around November to April. And when you collect your data, it's simply just figuring out identify who's coming to your feeders, recording them, sending them in, and this is contributing to research. And then at the very end, they will like actually look at all of the data that has been sent in, and they will compile that, and you get a report out that you can and feel good about contributing to that research. Again, you can also participate in bird banding as well. Here's a fun video of one of the young adults that I worked with releasing her first bird at a bird banding event. Again, it provides an opportunity to really learn about why you banned birds and how that helps with bird research. You can learn more about more bird banding, but this is an example of bird banding with non-game wildlife program. Or you can visit places like the National Eagle Center to learn more about it. And tip number 10, my last one, is to really take time to reflect on the things that you have learned. So if you are working with young people or yourself, you're constantly learning all these things, but it's really well worthwhile to take some time to really reflect and share what you have learned. Part of that is if you want to participate in conservation effort, one really big thing that everybody can do really easily is to spread the information that you learned. That's one really easily accessible way that you can make a big difference in the world of birds. So take some time, whether you use art or other creative outlets, to write down and express what you have learned and be able to share that with anyone. So this is an example of some mixed media art that a youth group worked on in the Bird by Bird program. They reflected on what kind of birds that they connected with, how they connected with them, why they connected with them, and also incorporated some important conservation messages. And then you can take some time to teach others, again, what you have learned. So whether that's you host like a bird walk, again, if you just engage your community members or engage your family members or friends. So that was my tip number 10. Thank you for taking the time out of your day today to join us for another Outdoor Skills and Stewardship episode. I hope you take away a few ideas at least on how to get started with bird watching, and you are able to get out there to start exploring the fascinating world of birds. Thank you.
Thanks, May. That was awesome information. Really great resources and ideas to introduce folks. Lots of applause for you. Thank you. We do have time for questions. If you have a specific question you want to ask May about birding or getting folks introduced to birding, please put that in the Q&A and we'll get through those. We have a few minutes that we're able to do that. So while we're waiting to see if any questions come in, I do want to mention, and we had, again, I talked about the recordings that we do and the videos. Cassie posted a couple of related videos, one in particular, as you mentioned, the backyard birding and bird feeding, which is a great subject and video if you want to check that out in in the links in the chat. And on our website at mndnr.gov/discover, you can search and get those listings and check out those previously done programs. And we had a great one, I think it was just this past spring, on warblers and how to find them and when to see them. And in the spring and the fall, we have a tremendous number of warblers that come through the state. So I also want to mention that you quickly referenced the Kestrel program and research, and Kristen's actually going to join us in just a few weeks on August 7th. So if folks are interested in birds, that'll be another great program to come back. If you haven't registered, go again to our website and do that. And you can join us for the talk that will be the folks from Eco Waters are going to be doing on kestrels and that research that they've been doing. I'm really looking forward to that. I see some questions. Alicia's wondering, is there a bird that you haven't been able to see yet that is on your bird bucket list?
That's a great question. There are lots and lots of birds, but I think like my focus right now is just really getting to know the warblers. And those ones are so small and there's so many of them that and they only come during a certain time of the year. So I feel like I learn all of them in spring and then they go away and then I forget all of them and then they come back and then I have to relearn them all again. And it is pretty hard a little bit later in the spring to be able to see them. So if I were to say, I wouldn't be able to pinpoint maybe just one, but the warblers.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about the bucket. Alicia mentioned the bucket list, and there are competitions, right? I think there's a movie about that came out a few years ago, and about life lists. And what are your thoughts, or what do you know about that, or what can you share about that?
I'm all for the life lists. So again, the state parks has those life lists or the park bird lists. But again, if you have this is what I was referencing to when I said that birding can be highly addicting. And so once you get started, then you might have that list of birds that you want to be able to see or your lifelong list. But that is a really great motivator. There are a lot of different organizations, nature centers, and places. For example, like I know Carpenter Nature Center always has, or this year they had a really big bird one, a bird challenge one just on the campus. So again, you don't have to go and participate in one of those. That is something that you can make your own list on your own as well. And you can go, as extreme as you want, right? Or you can, make it be like a all over travel all over the place, or it could just be just your Minnesota birds. And so I highly encourage that. That is one big way, especially with like young learners as well. I know it could be a little intimidating, but even if you started with like 5 simple birds on your list for them to look for, that's a great motivation to be continuing bird watching.
Yeah, and in your backyard in particular, I credit my mother for really introducing me to birding and natural resources for that matter. We were fortunate enough to live for a while in the Blue Earth River Valley in southern Minnesota, and she got me started. She and I started this list when I couldn't have been more than 10 years old on all the birds that we were seeing in our backyard and in our property. And I actually would burn them into a piece of plywood. So we had this permanent record, and it just got me started on that. And then it's a really great idea for kids. I started with my own kids, like to get them thinking and observe, the observation more than anything, to watching and just experiencing nature. And then we would keep track of all the birds that we've seen at our property and our place in the suburbs when they were growing up. So I've continued it because for me, it's just helped even continue we moved to a townhouse and I've started doing it there just to see all the great birds that we see out there. So I really encourage folks to do that as a way to keep track of a list or journal, and you can reflect back on that. It's really interesting to go back and see, oh, I just saw that bird again this year, and it'd be the same day that it came through the property, our yard, the year before, right? Because they have these migration habits. It's really cool to be able to see that and observe that. You talked about parks, and is there any like general tips like where, you mentioned waterways, but let's say in the Twin Cities area, like specific parks or locations that you would recommend for folks to go out to get outside of their backyard and do some birding?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm a little biased because I've done a lot of work in these parks. But again, Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary is a really great place. That is a wonderful place because there's wetlands, but there's like a prairie there. There's like a woodland area. And so it's just a variety of space. It's also right along the Mississippi River, so you get the eagles that fly over as well. Just lots of different varieties that you can find there. But again, there's so many wonderful places like right within the Twin Cities that you don't have to go very far to do any of the birding. And in fact, many of those photos that I actually took, those are the ones that are right around these neighborhoods as well. So.
Yeah, you mentioned parks, and we're so lucky to have so many state parks in our state, and state trails are really great because they go through so much different habitat. They'll pass by prairies and wetlands and even rivers and stuff. And you were talking about the indigo bunting, and we shouldn't share this, but the Browns Creek Trail, at least for a couple of years, had a family, obviously, of indigo buntings that were nesting right by Browns Creek. So if you're on that trail and you were paying attention or stop, you could often see indigo bunting. So yeah, we're so lucky. The trails are really great places to go also. Uh, Last chance for some other questions. If you have a specific birding question, we can try to answer that, or a bird that you've seen or you might want to know more about, please put that in. I brought this up in our practice. Is it true if you put salt on a bird's tail, it will freeze and you can catch it?
I don't know, Jeff.
That clearly a myth, but you were talking about the
Yeah.
first opportunity you've ever remember seeing birds, and I must have been no more than 5 years old, and my grandfather, I think, said, if you put salt on a bird's tail, this is a myth that I think that's been around in America for a long time. You can actually catch it. And I swear, I caught up to a robin around a little spruce tree that I had actually got salt on its tail, but it got away. It did not freeze. So I can tell you
There
for
you
sure
go. You're
that,
the first time you're spark a bird.
yeah, that was definitely a myth.
Yeah,
But a great way, another tip for kids, a great way to entertain kids for all afternoon.
that's
Give them,
true.
give them a salt shaker and let them know they can catch a bird if they get salt on its tail.
I bet that was quite
Uh,
hard to do.
yeah. Um, Barry mentioned that Maplewood State Park, for those of you in the northern part of the state, northwest part of the state, northwest central is a great place for birds. He found about 20 birds on the Merlin app in like only 15 minutes. So good.
Wow.
Thank you for that suggestion. Is all the questions we have. Is there anything else you want to add at all before we break?
Other than get out there and explore,
I was
we
going to
do
say the
have,
same thing.
yeah, we do have so many resources here, so many places. And not just like with birding, there's so many different opportunities to connect with nature. So just get out and explore.
Yeah. We've both been doing this education thing for a long time, and really it comes down to just getting out there and taking every opportunity, especially, and that's hopefully where a lot of people are today, is getting outside and enjoying this beautiful weather we have and just see opportunities to see things and observe things that you can see in nature. It's so fascinating and so fun. Speaking of that, it is summer. We're doing a bunch of fishing programs this summer on our Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series. Next week, actually, I'll be hosting and leading with one of our fish experts a topwater bass fishing program. So if you're thinking about getting into fishing or you started fishing and you want to learn more about that technique in particular, we'll have some great resources about fishing topwater for bass. It's so fun. And then on the 31st, in 2 weeks, we have a session on microfishing. So this is catching like really small fish, things you might not normally think about. There's a group of folks out there that have developed these techniques, and we're going to share some resources and talk to some folks that actually are out there and catching some really unique and really cool fish in Minnesota. So those are really fun ones to look forward to. Again, go to mndnr.gov/discover. You can sign up for those talks and see our videos and see this recording. Thank you so much today for joining us, May. It's been really great to hear about all these resources, and we're so excited to have you on our team. So thanks
Thanks for
everybody for
having
joining
me.
us. Yeah, we're welcome. Have a good day, everybody. Get outside.